This is the PowerPoint presentation for digital editing and design on the topic of color. So when we think of color, what we're thinking of most of the time is what's called hue. Hue is, well, it's when we see red, we know it's red. When we see blue, we know it's blue. When we see yellow, we know it's yellow. And the redness, the blueness, the yellowness, that's the hue. However, there are some other attributes of color that are important, and we're going to take a look at them. So the first attribute we're going to look at, besides hue, is saturation. And saturation is the amount of pure color of a particular hue. How red is the red, how blue is the blue. When we speak of fully saturated, we mean it's 100% red with no other color that's mixed in with it. And the last attribute we're going to speak about is value. And value is the lightness of the color. So how much white has been mixed in with it, or how much black has been mixed in with it. Those are your varying values. Now, saturation and value, when you vary them, they can give you sort of similar results, but they are not exactly the same thing, and I'm going to show you. So here we have an image that shows us hue. So there you see the color palette, which is the hue. And you can see saturation. To the right, we have the very saturated blue, and to the left, we have the undersaturated blue, which goes to gray. Right? If we look at value, we see that a low value is black and a high value is white. So saturation is essentially taking the color out or adding more intense color back in, whereas value is adding black or adding white. So there are two color systems, CMYK and RGB. RGB you probably have seen reference to. It is the primary colors, that's not a good word, not primary colors, but it is the color system that involves light. And CMYK is the color system for print. CMYK is cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And we call this subtractive color. And when you think about a printer, the process color has the four inks, which are cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And as you add cyan to magenta to yellow, you start with white, which is your blank paper, and then you end up with black. Or sometimes, as we sadly remember from kindergarten, kind of a muddy brown. But anyhow, that's why it's called subtractive color, because as you put them together, it is going towards black. So when you think about light and color, it's in the RGB, are the primary colors of light. And you start off with no light, which is black. And then as you add light, as you add red light and green light and blue light, you go toward the color white. So when all the colors of light are added together, it is white, and therefore we call that additive color, because when you add the colors together, they turn out white. So we spent that time talking about cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, and I wanted to show you how it was related to red, green, and blue, to RGB. And you can see here you've got cyan, which is on the top, yellow, which is to your left, and blue, which is to your right. And when you combine them, they make green, red, and blue. Kind of a purpley blue, but a blue nonetheless. So they are indeed related. But they are not the color wheel, so I don't want you to become confused. I use the words primary colors, and I really shouldn't have, because the primary colors are red, yellow, and blue. They always will be. They won't change. They're just not the colors that we use to print with, but those are the primary colors. Let me show you what a standard color wheel looks like. So this is a color wheel, and I don't want you to become overly confused by the color wheel. It's not that difficult, and the concepts that I want you to get out of it we'll discuss in a minute. So if this is a little bit confusing, just ask me questions when you see me in class, and I'll go back and we can talk about it a little bit more. You do have to be able to understand how the colors are related to each other, and the way you do that is using the color wheel. So these are the primary colors, red, blue, and yellow. As I said, these were the primary colors when we were all in kindergarten. They will never change. These are the secondary colors, orange, green, and violet. Now, I want you to think about a company that happens to use the triad of secondary colors. Okay, so you've thought of it, right? And you can tell me what it is when you come into class. And these are the tertiary colors, which are red-violet, red-orange, yellow-orange, yellow-green, blue-green, and blue-violet. And all of those colors together, the primary colors, red, yellow, and blue, the secondary colors, violet, orange, and green, and then these colors, which are the tertiary colors, are what make up a standard color wheel. An artist's color wheel, I guess, is what they call it. And here's another little fun piece of information. Black, white, and gray, and all of the variations in between them, are not colors per se. They are not on the color wheel. They are called neutrals. You can call them neutral colors if you'd like, but you will probably, since you're most likely to use either white, black, or gray somewhere in your design, you are going to have to refer to them. But just remember that they're not colors and they're not on the color wheel. So remember I said earlier that what we had was the standard color wheel, right? Well, this is the color wheel that I like to use, though. And if you look at it, you will see that it is indeed a printer's color wheel. It has yellow at the top, cyan at the 25 position, and magenta at the 13 position. It also has green at 31, red at 7, and blue at 19, right? What you will use this for is because you'll use it to describe the relationship to the colors. We're going to talk about those relationships, but this is the color wheel that when I'm thinking of a color wheel, this is the color wheel I'm thinking of. And one of the cool things is if you look toward the center, right around in the center there, they have put all of the complements, which is the opposite of each color, right around there, so it's pretty easy to see them in contrast. So one of the first things we're going to talk about when we use the color wheel is the temperature of color. I'm going to ask you to discuss the attributes of color in your brochure, in your magazine, and in any other, in your infographic or web page. And one of the things you're going to want to discuss is the temperature of color. Half of the color wheel, which is from red to yellow-green, is considered warm, right? Warm colors are active colors. I encourage you to go to the Color and Motion website and look at the descriptions, particularly for red, but all of these colors advance, and they are all considered to be active. This is opposed to the cool colors, which is the other half of the color wheel. These are the blues, right? These colors appear to recede. So if you're looking at a piece of printed work, reds pop out, blues kind of fade backward, and they're considered to be passive. We think of them as being calming. In fact, blue is a very calming color. When you change the value of a color, what you get are the tint, which is the color plus white, or the tone, which is the color plus gray, or the shade, which is the color plus black. And that makes a monochromatic color scheme, meaning a single color. Yes. So colors that are opposite each other, in this case you see it's red and green, are called complementary colors. Complementary colors are the most at war with each other, the most, I guess we could say, kind of clashing. When you bring them together, they have the greatest difference, which is one of the reasons why we really don't often wear red and green outside of, Santa Claus and Christmas. Colors that are next to each other are called analogous colors. And analogous colors, exactly the opposite of complements. Complements are fighting each other. They're kind of at war. They have a lot of tension. Analogous colors work with each other because they're practically the same. And so there's a lack of tension. And these are the things you're going to need to talk about when you're talking about the use of color in your work. So then we have the triad. The triad is sort of halfway between the complementary and analogous. It is the equivalent of just right, which if you remember Goldilocks and the Three Bears, I think that's Baby Bear, whose bed is just right. They are bold, right, which means they have some tensions. They're bold, but they are balanced, which represents the idea that they also work together. Again, I'm going to remind you that there is a very well-known company that uses this particular triad, which is the triad that forms the secondary colors, as the colors for its logo and for all of its packaging. And you will, of course, be able to tell me that when I see you the next time. And I also want to note here that we have 3 colors. Right? So why are we talking about 3 colors in this case? It's because most palettes that you use are 3 colors. A primary color, a secondary color, and an accent color. Now things get a little bit more complicated. We call colors split complementary. That is one hue. In this case it's kind of a dark green, right? And then you're using it with 2 other colors that are analogous, that are equally spaced from the complement. So here again, you see that we have 3 colors. So one would be the primary color, one would be the secondary color, and the third would be the accent color. Usually the 2 that are close to each other, and they don't have to be quite this close, right, are the primary and the secondary, and then you use the one that is far away from the others, the one that is going to have the most tension, as an accent. We have double complementary, which means that we have 2, in this case 4 colors that we're using, and they are both complements. So there are a lot of fun things to remember about color, but these are important, right? So when you have 2 variations of the same color, one light and one dark, and they are next to each other, the lighter shade will appear lighter and the darker shade will appear to be darker. The contrast between them will be heightened. Okay? A lavender shade will appear to be paler against a purple background. That's because the purple is darker than the lavender. So those 2 are next to each other. One's light, the lavender's light, the purple is dark, and so the purple's going to seem darker than it really is all by itself when you're looking at it alone, and the lavender will appear lighter. These are important when you're using colors together. Also, people often confine a color to a particular feature, right? Let's suppose you're doing a magazine. Sometimes the subheads, the department heads, right, will be in red, and that will be the only thing in red in the magazine, so it calls your attention to that. But if you use the red too many times, and red is particularly bad if you use it too many times, it starts to become distracting, and you no longer are using it to call attention to things. So here we have a little trick, I guess. Look at that shade of yellow. Think in your mind what shade it really is. Now, envision this shade of black. It is a pure black. So when you put them together, what you see as compared to when you're dealing with colors of the same shade, when you are dealing with two different colors, you actually find that the yellow is going to get darker. It almost seems to suck up some of the black, and the black now appears lighter. If you want to see this in action, just go back and forth between through those three slides a couple times, and you should see it. Now here's another one that I like a lot. I'll put this up and I will ask students which box is the lightest. And invariably everyone says it's the one in the upper left, which is surrounded by black. And then I'll ask them which is the darkest. And invariably it is the one in the lower right, which is surrounded by white. Right? Why is that? It's because of the contrast between the lavender and the black and the lavender and the white. In actuality, all three of these boxes are exactly the same color. You look and see what the green is doing. The green is actually almost changing the shade of the color, right? And the blue is not quite as dark as the black, so the box inside looks not quite as light as the one above. But remember, these three boxes all the same color. I just copied and pasted the box 4 times. Pretty cool, huh? So that was all about the sort of technical aspects of color. But we also have to think about the psychological aspects of color. And every color has some meaning. Again, I'm going to send you to Color in Motion. You have to look at that website because it goes through the meaning of all the different colors. And there are a myriad of meanings, and some of them are culturally relevant and some of them are not. There are some that are pretty universally shared. One is red, right? It is a tension-getting color. It is the color of blood and fire. Right? And it is the first color that got a name after black and white. Red actually has a physical impact. When you see red, you will start to breathe more rapidly, your blood pressure will go up, your pulse rate will increase, your heartbeat will increase, and you should have more adrenaline. So there's an actual physiological change. You also will usually become hungry. There's a reason why McDonald's uses red and yellow. They are colors that make you hungry. So we call the warm tones, and red in particular, high arousal colors. And they create arousal, the many sorts, as I said, appetites, right? So McDonald's uses red. Sports cars are red because you want to go fast, right? Some lingerie is red because it is arousing, right? It's very aggressive, it commands attention, and it demands action. There's a reason why we put stop signs in red and white, because we want you to see them and we want it to command attention. And remember, we were talking about black and white are the first two colors named. Black is one that I like because the meaning has changed over time. When we didn't have electric lights, right? When we didn't have any sort of real decent light sources after night, black was a very negative color. It was the color of mourning and death, at least in Western civilization. Why? Because if you were outside the city walls and it got dark, there was a good chance that you would end up dead by the next morning. Being out in the dark was very dangerous. Well, now that we have lots of light and it is cool to be out at night, black begins to take on a new meaning, and that is of sophistication and elegance, and the little red, the little black dress. So again, it's really important to know that color carries meaning, and that companies choose colors carefully and with thought. They don't just say, I kind of like green and purple. I think I'll use them. No, they're thinking about what the effect of that color is going to be when they're used together on the consumer, on the person who's looking at whatever it is that they're selling, right? So you need to choose your colors carefully as well, because the color impacts the meaning of what you're going to say. Each color, right, has a mood that goes with it, and usually some symbology that goes with it. here are some examples. You take a look at them. Again, I'm going to point you back to the Color and Motion website. You have to look at that, because while it deals with sort of the primary and secondary colors, it really gives you a lot of information about them, and it's pretty in-depth. It's also fun to watch. And that can help you, because you're going to need to talk to me when you talk about color in your papers that accompany your rough drafts. You're going to need to talk to me about the meaning of the colors and what they say together. So remember I said that color usually comes in threes, right? We have the primary, the secondary, and the accent color. Here you see them called the dominant, the subordinate, and the accent color. But anyhow, you should always have a primary color, one that is going to be used the most. There should be a secondary color, one that is used less, and then there should be an accent color that you use, again, only when you are highlighting something. So remember, I want you to create your palette based on your message, not justify your palette in your paper to me based on what you chose because it just came to you, right? So when you're thinking about your print piece, you have to determine the mood, right? How much color do you want? And then you might look at some of the images you have and see what's in them. You might look at other pieces of work that are similar to what you're trying to do. And then look at a color wheel and decide how much tension you want, right? Do you want it to be really active? Do you want it to be more passive? Do you want there to be a lot of tension between the colors? Or do you want it to be a fairly calming effect? Calming effect would be, right, something that is analogous or monochromatic and probably not a warm tone, more likely a cool tone. Okay? However, if you want something that's very exciting and very tense, right, you could use some complementary colors, maybe split complementaries that are equidistant apart, right? That's about as far apart as you can get. So that's the end of my fun-filled color lecture. I want you to take a look at all of the resources that are in this module. Again, color and motion is really important. But there's a couple of other websites that discuss color theory in depth. And if you are interested in color, and if you're interested in design in general, you might want to take a look at those too, because color theory is like a class. It's not, I mean, as in it's like a course. It's not just one day. So you probably would find those sites kind of fun. And remember, use the things we talked about in your discussion. You should be talking about saturation. You should be talking about hue. You should be talking about value. You should be talking about warm and cold. You should be talking about analogous and complementary and further apart. Right? You should be talking about the meaning of the color, but not just the meaning, right? Most people get something with the meaning, okay. It's not just the meaning, it's how they work together as well.